Hi, I'm Deeksha and today we'll be talking about the middle ear. We'll look at the anatomy and we'll look at the boundaries, we'll look at the contents of the middle ear. Before that, we'll get a basic orientation to where the ear is located. Okay, so we have our skull here and we'll keep the mandible aside, and as we know, this is the temporal bone here and this is where the ear is located. It's located inside of this temporal bone. So we'll have a look at the parts of the temporal bone. So we have the squamous part of the temporal bone. This is the mastoid part of the temporal bone. This is the tympanic part. This is the styloid process of the temporal bone. This outside, on the outside of the skull. On the inside of the skull as well, we have a few parts. So this is the temporal bone here, and this part is a squamosal part, and this part is the petrous part of the temporal bone. So the whole ear is located, starts from here as the external auditory canal, and it goes inside. This is an artificial skull, so you can't see the cavity here. So it goes inside, and inside of this cavity is where the ear is present. This is the external auditory canal, which, as we see here, leads into the temporal bone and forms the entire cavity of the ear. Okay, this is the external auditory canal, and this part somewhere here will be the middle ear, and this part inside is the inner ear. We are seeing the parts of the ear in form of an image. This is the external ear, this is the middle ear, this is the inner ear, and this is what we'll be talking about today. The middle ear is compared to a six-sided box. It's said to have a roof, it's said to have a floor, a lateral wall, a medial wall, an anterior and a posterior wall. So it's basically a cube. So what I have here is a model of the middle ear. We said it has 6 sides. So I made a box with 6 sides representing the middle ear with its boundaries, its contents, and we'll learn the middle ear through this today. A basic orientation to the sides of this. This is the lateral side. This is the anterior side. This is the roof. This is the floor. This is the medial side. And this is the posterior side. We'll start with the lateral side. So here we have the external auditory canal, which ends in the tympanic membrane here, as we see. This is the tympanic membrane, and this is what leads to the middle ear cavity. Okay, so this is the tympanic membrane as we see here. Let's try to identify which side of the tympanic membrane it is. We see this is the pars tensa, this is the pars flaccida, and so this, since this is pointing this way, this has to be the anterior part, and this is the superior part, so this has to be the right side ear. Okay, so this is the tympanic membrane leading to the middle ear, and this forms the lateral boundary of the middle ear cavity. The tympanic membrane is also the one which divides the tympanic cavity into 3 divisions. We'll see what they are. So here we see the tympanic membrane. Okay, so the part of the tympanic cavity in level with the pars tensa is called the mesotympanum. The part above it is called the epitympanum, this part. Okay, and the part below pars tensa, below pars tensa, is called the hypotympanum. So this part. So here, if this is the cavity, this part will be pars mesotympanum, this part will be epitympanum, this part will be hypotympanum. So what we see here is the external auditory canal, and this is the tympanic membrane. And we can see, if we remove the tympanic membrane, this is what we can see. So this is the tympanic cavity, the middle ear cavity, through which we see various structures. This is an image to represent the middle ear, and we see here the tympanic membrane, which forms the lateral boundary of the middle ear cavity. So we learned the 3 divisions of the tympanic cavity right now, which is in level with pars tensa, which will be mesotympanum. Above it will be epitympanum, below it will be hypotympanum. Next we'll see the roof of the tympanic cavity, we'll see, so the middle ear is situated inside the temporal bone. So the roof will have to be a bone. So this will be the temporal bone. This will be the temporal bone, over which there'll be, and it's related to the brain. So it will be covered by meninges, following above which will be the temporal lobe of the brain. We are seeing the roof of the middle ear cavity here. So this is the temporal bone which will be forming the roof, over which there will be the meningeal layers, over which there is a temporal lobe of the brain. So any infection in the middle ear cavity has the propensity to spread through the bone, through to the meninges and to the temporal lobe of the brain. Now the floor is formed by the bone, a thin plate of bone which separates the middle ear cavity from the jugular bulb. I have marked the jugular bulb here. So, but then in between the jugular bulb and the middle ear cavity, there is a thin plate of bone. Floor of the middle ear cavity, we have the jugular bulb here. How is it formed? We have the sigmoid sinus intracranially. When the sigmoid sinus exits through the jugular foramen, it forms a bulb here called the jugular bulb, and then it continues down as the internal jugular vein. So this is the jugular bulb forming the floor of the middle ear cavity. We see the anterior wall of the tympanic cavity right now. This is the anterior wall. As we see here, it has a few cavities. This is the cavity of the eustachian tube. We see here it leads to the eustachian tube, and this above it, in the roof of the eustachian tube, there is a tiny cavity for the tensor tympani muscle. This muscle attaches to the handle of malleus, okay, and this is the cavity for the tensor tympani muscle. And we also have the opening for exit of the chorda tympani nerve. The chorda tympani nerve enters from the posterior wall, lies in between the malleus and the incus, and then it exits through the anterior wall this way. And on the anterior wall, we also have the carotid canal through which the internal carotid artery passes. Infection of the pharynx, the nasopharynx, can enter through the eustachian tube and cause infection in the middle ear cavity. This is the importance of the anterior wall. So we are seeing the anterior wall of the tympanic cavity. We have the eustachian tube, and we have the cavity for the tensor tympani muscle. Tensor tympani muscle goes and attaches to the handle of malleus, as we see here. And we also have the internal carotid artery in the carotid canal, which lies anterior to the tympanic cavity. We will now talk about the medial wall of the middle ear cavity. The most prominent feature in the middle ear cavity is the promontory. This is a bulge produced on the middle ear because of the basal turn of the cochlea. So here will be the inner ear, and the basal turn of the cochlea will rotate like this, will go like this. So the basal turn produces a bulge here called the promontory. Okay, and then we have the oval window which attaches the foot plate of stapes as so. So we have the ossicles here, malleus, incus and stapes. So this is the stapes with the foot plate of stapes here. The foot plate of stapes attaches to the oval window as such. And then we have the round window here. Round window is covered by a membrane called a secondary tympanic membrane. Above the oval window, we have the lateral semicircular canal prominence. So here will be the lateral inner ear with the lateral semicircular canal, which is also called the horizontal semicircular canal, that produces a bulge in the middle ear cavity, and that is the prominence we see here. So and then we have the processus cochleariformis. This is a curved plate of tissue which has which anchors the tendon of tensor tympani muscle. We saw the tensor tympani muscle originates from here, and it takes a turn at the processus cochleariformis, as we see here, and from here it attaches to the handle of malleus. We'll see how it does. So this is how it goes. We'll have we have the chorda tympani nerve passing through. We have the chorda tympani nerve passing through malleus and incus, and here the tensor tympani muscle, it attaches to the handle of malleus as such. So it takes a turn here and then attaches to the handle of malleus. The most important feature in the middle ear is the facial nerve. As we see here, this is the horizontal part of the facial nerve. The facial nerve enters the middle ear cavity through the internal acoustic meatus. So the meatus will be present somewhere here. Through the internal acoustic meatus, the facial nerve enters and it takes a sharp turn here. It's called the genu of facial nerve, and where the geniculate ganglion of facial nerve is present. It takes a turn and runs horizontally on the medial wall as so, and then it continues over the posterior wall. So this part of the facial nerve is the horizontal part of facial nerve. How do we identify? This facial nerve is not present as a nerve itself. It's present inside a bony canal called the fallopian canal. Okay, so this fallopian canal can be identified as to lie between the lateral semicircular canal prominence above, the oval window below, and then it's also related, the genu is related to the processus cochleariformis as we see here. So these are the important landmarks to identify the facial nerve in the fallopian canal and the middle ear cavity. So this is the horizontal part of the facial nerve. Through the floor is also the entry of the glossopharyngeal nerve. This glossopharyngeal nerve ascends up along the medial wall and it forms a plexus over the promontory on the medial wall, called the tympanic plexus. The medial wall of the middle ear cavity, we see the promontory, the bulge here formed by the basal turn of cochlea, and then the glossopharyngeal nerve which entered through the floor. It's forming the tympanic plexus here along with various other nerves that supplies the sensory supply to the whole of the middle ear cavity. And we see here the facial nerve is entering through the internal acoustic meatus and it is running horizontally in the medial wall of the middle ear cavity, and it's forming a ganglion here called the geniculate ganglion, and above this is the prominence of the lateral semicircular canal, and we see here is the oval window where the foot plate of stapes is attached. Here is the round window. This image is to show the processus cochleariformis. We see here it's like a curved bone which is present, which provides anchoring to the tendon of tensor tympani muscle. We'll now talk about the posterior wall of the middle ear cavity. So the main feature here is the aretus adantrum, which is a cavity which leads the middle ear to the mastoid process which will lie behind it. So this is the middle ear and mastoid process will be posterior to the middle ear. So aretus adantrum is the entryway for the middle ear to enter into the mastoid cavity behind this. Okay, and then we have a few features. Then we have the vertical part of the facial nerve. We saw the facial nerve has a horizontal part and it continues on the posterior wall. This is the vertical part of the facial nerve we see here. The vertical part of the facial nerve which runs this way, and we have the entry of the chorda tympani nerve present here, which is a chorda tympani is a branch of facial nerve and it produces this branch before entering the stylomastoid foramen. So it enters from behind. The chorda tympani enters from behind, and it enters the middle ear cavity. Then we see what is called the fossa incudis present here. The fossa incudis is basically a depression formed by the short process of incus. We see here malleus, incus and stapes. This is the incus with the body, long process, short process. The short process of the incus produces a depression here. This short process of the incus creates a depression on the posterior wall that is called the fossa incudis. Then we have and the facial nerve is also present inside the fallopian canal here as well. Then we have the pyramid. Pyramid is basically a piece of bone which extends from the fallopian canal, and that gives rise to the stapedius muscle. Stapedius muscle attaches to the head of the stapes as such. It attaches to the head of the stapes and causes contraction of the, if the contraction of the muscle causes retraction of the footplate of stapes from the oval window. Then we have two important spaces on the posterior wall. One is the facial recess area, one is the sinus tympani area. What is the facial recess area? It's the area bounded medially by the vertical part of the facial nerve in the fallopian canal, laterally by the chorda tympani nerve, and medially by the fossa incudis. So this space here is the facial recess area. What is the importance of the facial recess area? If there's a surgery being performed on the middle ear cavity through the mastoid, then this is the area through which the middle ear is entered. So through the mastoid, this area is identified, a hole is made in this area to enter the middle ear cavity for surgeries. And the next area is the sinus tympani area. This area lies medial to the pyramid, but then for easier purposes I have made the model like this. Okay, the sinus tympani area is the space here, okay, which is bounded by two ridges of bones. One above is called the ponticulus and the one below is called the subiculum. So this sinus tympani area is the area lateral to the fallopian canal. So what is the importance of the sinus tympani cavity? If a surgery is being performed in the middle ear cavity through the mastoid, so through the facial recess, there will be the fallopian canal which will be present here. Through this entrance, we cannot identify the sinus tympani cavity. If there is any infection lying there, that cannot be removed. So what we have to do is enter the middle ear cavity through the tympanic membrane. The tympanic membrane is retracted, and through this, and from here we can see the sinus tympani cavity and operate and remove this infection lying there. We have the posterior wall of the tympanic cavity, the middle ear cavity. We have the facial nerve which is entering. This is the medial wall of the cavity, so horizontal part of facial nerve. It's descending down here. This is the vertical part of facial nerve, and it's in the fallopian canal, which lies in the posterior wall of the middle ear cavity. And we see here is the chorda tympani nerve, which it gives rise to before entering the stylomastoid foramen. This chorda tympani nerve enters the cavity and it exits anteriorly. Okay, and then we have the step pyramid here, which gives rise to the stapedius muscle. Stapedius muscle attaches to the head of stapes, as we see here, and this stapedius muscle is supplied by the nerve to stapedius muscle, which arises from the facial nerve, from the vertical part of the facial nerve. And we see here the recesses. This is the lateral, this is medial, this is posterior, this is anterior. Okay, and this is the facial recess area, this is the pyramid, and this is the sinus tympani area. And this is a stapedius muscle, as we see here, which is attaching to the head of the stapes. And we see the chorda tympani nerve passing from the posterior wall entry and then exiting through the anterior wall of the middle ear. We are seeing the temporal bone here, and this is the external auditory canal, the middle ear cavity. And in the middle ear cavity, we'll try to identify a few structures. So this is the lateral, this is medial, right? So we see the oval window here. This is the round window. This is the promontory, the prominence of the basal turn of cochlea. And above the oval window, the bone part we see here is the fallopian canal, which will house the facial nerve. And this is the prominence of the lateral semicircular canal. And here we see this is the pyramid to which a stapedius muscle will be attached. Here we see the entry of chorda tympani nerve. And the anterior wall, we see the eustachian tube here. This is the tensor tympani muscle cavity. We see the facial nerve here, facial nerve entering to the through the internal acoustic meatus and running in the fallopian canal. This is the chorda tympani nerve, and this is a tympanic plexus over the promontory. This is the glossopharyngeal nerve. Now we can see the root of the facial nerve properly here. here we see this will be the internal acoustic meatus through which facial nerve comes, and then it takes a turn here. This is the horizontal part of the facial nerve along the medial wall of the middle ear cavity. This is the geniculate ganglion present on the sharp turn. Then this runs vertically down, as we see here, vertically down, and in this pathway it also gives rise to the chorda tympani nerve, as we see here. This is showing the three ossicles, the malleus, incus, and the stapes. So we see here the handle of malleus attaching to the tympanic membrane. From outside, this will be the umbo, which will be visible. This is the malleus, the incus, the long process, short process of the incus, which forms the fossa incudus on the posterior wall, and then we have the stapes. Stapes, so foot plate attached to the oval window. Here we have the stapedius muscle, which is attaching to the head of the stapes. Then we have this is the tensor tympani muscle running in the cavity and then attaching to the handle of malleus, as we see here. And this is the chorda tympani nerve, which is entering from the posterior cavity wall and exiting through the anterior wall. With regard to contents of the middle ear cavity, we have the three ossicles, we have the malleus, we have the incus, and we have the stapes. The malleus has few parts. This is the head of the malleus, the neck of the malleus, the lateral process of the malleus, the anterior process of the malleus, and this is the handle of malleus. Then we have the incus with the body, the long process, the short process of incus. This forms the fossa incudus on the posterior wall. This is the lenticular process of the incus. Then we have the stapes with the head of the stapes, the crura, two crura of the stapes, which is posterior crura, the anterior crura, and this is the foot plate of stapes, which attaches to the oval window. And this joint between malleus and incus is a saddle type of joint, whereas this joint between incus and stapes is a ball and socket kind of joint. We looked at models and we looked at diagrams for the middle ear cavity. Now we'll try to identify the same structures from a real image taken on inside of the middle ear cavity. I'm starting to learn all of this, so I have taken a labeled image here for easier purposes, but slowly all of us will learn. Okay, so we have the promontory here. This is the medial wall. It has to be the medial wall. So we have the promontory here, and we have the facial nerve, which is running the lateral semicircular canal, and this is the round window. So this somewhere here should be the oval window, and if this is the pyramidal eminence. So this will be the stapedius muscle, which will attach to the head of the stapes. Then we have the sinus tympani here, bounded by ponticulus and subiculum. And Jacobson's nerve is basically the tympanic branch of glossopharyngeal nerve, which runs and forms the tympanic plexus. And we have another image here, which is also similar. So we have the promontory. Okay, this is the epitympanum. So this is the superior part, this is the middle part, and this is the inferior part, hypotympanum. The promontory with the Jacobson's nerve on it, and this is we see the ossicles here. So this is the malleus, the handle of malleus, the umbo, the lateral process of malleus, and this is the incus, the long process of the incus. This is the lenticular process of the incus, which will attach to the stapes here, and this is the foot plate of the stapes, which is attaching to the oval window. Then we see the pyramidal eminence. The stapedius muscle will attach to the head of the stapes. The sinus tympani, bounded by ponticulus and subiculum, and this is the anterior part. So this is the eustachian tube. We'll now quickly revise through the middle ear cavity. So we have the boundaries of the middle ear cavity: the lateral, anterior, medial, and the posterior wall, and the roof, the floor. The lateral wall is formed by the tympanic membrane, and the anterior wall has the eustachian tube, along with the attachment for tensor tympani muscle and the exit of the chorda tympani nerve. And in front of the anterior wall is the carotid canal with the internal carotid artery. Then we have the roof, which is formed by the temporal bone and the meninges and the temporal lobe of the brain. And then we have the floor, which is formed by thin plate of bone which separates the middle ear cavity from the jugular bulb. Then we have the medial wall, which the most prominent feature is the promontory, which has a tympanic plexus formed over it. Then we have the oval window, the round window. Then we have the prominence of the lateral semicircular canal. We have the processus cochleariformis providing the support for the tendon of arching of the tendon of tensor tympani muscle. Then we have the facial nerve, which enters through the internal acoustic meatus, forms a turn here, and also geniculate ganglion. Then forms the horizontal part of the facial nerve, which runs in the fallopian canal. Then coming to the posterior wall, we have the adductus aneatrum, which leads the middle ear to the mastoid process. Then we have the vertical part of the facial nerve, which runs in the fallopian canal. The fossa incudus, formed by the short process of incus. The chorda tympani nerve enters the posterior middle ear through the posterior wall. Then we have the facial recess area, which is formed medially by the vertical part of facial nerve, the chorda tympani laterally, and the fossa incudus superiorly. Then we have the pyramid, which attaches the stapedius muscle, which in turn attaches to the head of the stapes. The stapedius muscle is supplied by the nerve to stapes, which arises from the facial nerve. Then we have the sinus tympani area, which lies medial to the fallopian canal, that is bounded above by the ponticulus and below by the subiculum. So we saw the middle ear today, the anatomy of the middle ear today. So you can pause the video, you can revise the parts for yourself, and I tried to make a simplified version of the separate images of the walls we see. I think it makes more sense when it's a 3D model. So that's why I made this model, and I hope it was useful for you to understand. Tell me how it was, comment down below, and yeah, like the video if you liked it, understood something, and then you can subscribe to the channel. I'll try to make more of such models. And thank you. Bye bye.